Good afternoon. For practical reasons, I will start immediately in English. So first, short organizational information. We will have today the 3 rounds. First, the presentations by our speakers, then a round of the more focused questions, and then we'll have the possibility of questions from the audience. So while discussing the challenges related to quality of teaching and learning, we naturally refer to possibly criteria of quality. And it actually can consider universities themselves, how the quality is organized within the university, but also the criteria which are used by the agencies responsible for external assessment. And it happened that in the framework of the European higher education area, we have the standards and guidelines for quality assurance. It's not just another document prepared by the European institutions, I have to underline this. And this is actually a common understanding of basic principles for quality in higher education, which has been agreed by ministers from 48 countries and by the organizations, European organizations representing all main stakeholders in the higher education system. And we think that it is very important for structure of our debates today and tomorrow that we start from recalling this common understanding, especially regarding quality assurance processes within universities. And for this purpose, I would like to invite Ms. Tia Loukkola from the European University Association. Tia, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. Indeed, my name is Tia Loukkola. I work for the European University Association as a Director for Institutional Development. My organization is a membership organization of over 800 universities across Europe. And when I talk about Europe, I talk about 47 countries, in other words, European higher education area, so more than European Union. Many of the Polish universities are our members, and so is the Polish National Rectors Conference, KRASP. And one of the tasks that we do at European level on behalf of the universities is that we represent the universities in different kind of policy discussions, meetings and events, and that's part of the reason why I'm here also today. And importantly for the topic of today, we represent the university voice in the Bologna process in all the meetings that take place around Europe. And one of the areas where we've been particularly active is quality assurance, where we have felt that we need to bring the university voice into the discussion. As the chair of the session already mentioned, one of the cornerstones in the European quality assurance is a document called European Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance. My organization, together with some other stakeholder organizations, has been part of the drafting group preparing this document. So it is important to say that the document is adopted by the Ministers for Higher Education. So it does have the political and governmental support, but it is developed by the stakeholder organizations, quality assurance agencies, universities, and students. So it has our support as well. And the thing is, it's not a new document as such. The first version was already adopted in 2005. However, the reason why it is perhaps timely to talk about it again is that the new version was adopted in 2015, and it has some new features in it. And I understand that the reform that will take place in Poland will also be looking into trying to comply with the new features of this new version. The document has 3 parts. It talks about internal quality assurance that takes place in the higher education institutions. It talks about what kind of external quality assurance we should be carrying out in Europe, and it also talks about how to ensure the quality of quality assurance agencies themselves. So it is structured in 3 parts. What do these 3 parts constitute is a reference framework on how quality assurance is carried out in Europe. There was a reference made in the morning already to the fact that for instance, in Poland, there is a willingness to ensure that the qualifications awarded by the Polish universities are recognized across Europe, also in the other countries. And one of the ideas is that if we do quality assurance, if we quality assure our education more or less in the same way, at least we have agreed on certain principles on how we do it across Europe, it will be easier for us to recognize each other's education and the qualifications given to the students. So that's why the ESG is there. It needs to be said that it includes principles for quality assurance. It doesn't include the quality standards as such. Those are defined at national level or institutional level. And it defines principles. It doesn't say exactly what needs to be done in the universities, and it doesn't say exactly what needs to be done by the agencies. It leaves leeway for interpretation. However, one of the important core principles of quality assurance in Europe is that higher education institutions have the main responsibility for quality assurance. Everything is based on the work done in the universities. Universities need to be responsible for the quality of education they offer. And that the quality assurance needs to respond to the needs of different stakeholders, students, employers, governments, and so on. And it needs to support development of quality culture in the universities. Maybe those are the most important things. I'm going back to the responsibility of higher education institutions. As I said, there are 3 parts in the document and the standards for different actors. I think Colin will afterwards refer more to the agency part, but I will say a few words to wrap up my introductory words about the institutional responsibility. In your conference booklet, by the way, as of page 36, you can find a list of all the standards, and they have also been translated into Polish. I have put here on this slide the standards for universities. So in a way, these 10 standards outline the minimum that a university needs to do in terms of quality assurance, and the minimum of what the agency should look at that the universities are doing. For the most part, they are not really revolutionary for universities. I would like to think that many of us do these things without thinking that we do quality assurance. For instance, we have probably always in universities had in place some processes how we design our programs. We have always designed programs. Whether we do it in a most effective manner is another matter, and we can improve in that one. But my message to all the universities would be to at least look at the 10 standards that are also in the booklet and reflect on how you are doing this as a university. Where there is a little bit of revolution is perhaps the 3 that are in bold. There are some new things in the standards for universities. For instance, the design of the programs. There is now a reference to the national qualification framework, that when you design a program, you take into account the national requirements of the national qualification framework. But I think, for instance, in Poland, this is something that has already been done because there is a functioning national qualification framework. What I can say is that the one that seems to cause most challenges for the universities at the moment, based on the feedback we have received in the last 2 years, is the standard 1.3, which is student-centered learning, teaching, and assessment. How do we as universities demonstrate that we have become student-centered in our educational mission? This is something we've discussed in many, many events, and I don't think we actually have a recipe for it completely. It will probably depend on your context and how you work as a university. To conclude, the new standards and guidelines for quality assurance in Europe, they do put more emphasis on institutional responsibility for quality assurance. When the document was revised, most of the changes took place in the part 1, which deals with the universities. So I think we need to, as a universities, take this responsibility seriously. And but I would at the same time say that when we look at the universities Europe-wide, we see that a lot of the quality assurance structures and processes are in place, but we do see that there are, of course, challenges. They don't work optimally. And then when reading the standards, one needs to always think about the context in which we operate. National context, you have certain national requirements in addition to the standards that are in the European document. And anyway, there needs to be adjustment made from big university to small one and so on. The processes will look different, so I do underline the importance of the context. I'll wrap up here, so to keep the time before I'm being interrupted, but looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Tia, and also thank you for keeping the time frame. Well, at the Lublin conference, we are not only discussing the quality of education as such, but we are also focusing on those topics which are significant in the context of drafting the new law. And registration in the European Quality Assurance Register is a notion which is indeed quite important in the context of international accreditations or potentially also recognition of degrees. And it was already mentioned by Prime Minister Govin. So I would like to invite Mr. Colin Tück to present the concept of ECAR and practical consequences of registration in ECAR.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the Ministry for the kind invitation to present in the conference today. It's a big pleasure to be here and hosted at the University of Catholic University of Lublin. So ECAR, the European Quality Assurance Register, is the official register of trustworthy and credible quality assurance agencies in the European higher education area. So we are the register of those quality assurance agencies that have demonstrated to really operate in line with the agreed European standards and guidelines, ESG, that were introduced by Tia before. So I'm going to disappoint you that I'm not going to go into detail in the different standards for agencies and for external quality assurance processes, since they are also, as you know, available in the booklet and so on. But so essentially the register is about confirming which are the agencies that really are organized in line with the standards for agencies, as they are in part 3 of the ESG, that do external quality assurance in line with the standards and guidelines for external quality assurance processes, part 2 of the ESG, and that ultimately also have their own standards that they apply to institutions mapped and aligned with part 1 of the ESG in the end of the day. What Tia said for the European standards and guidelines, that they have been developed by stakeholders and yet adopted by governments, sort of is also true and mirrored in ECAR, how we are set up and how our governance is organized, since ECAR was established and founded by the same, in 2008, by the same organizations that have created the European standards and guidelines, but it now involves both the key European stakeholders and European governments in our own governing structure and in running the organization. But what I also want to stress is that ECAR and the ESG are part of the European higher education area's broader framework for quality, maybe, if I can call it like that. So we have standards and guidelines for the quality assurance process. As has been said, they're not quality standards, but we also have a European qualifications framework of the European higher education area that describes desired learning outcomes of bachelor, master, and doctoral qualifications. And all these things, the ESG, AQUA, and the qualifications framework together really form the whole European infrastructure for quality, and they're all working hand in hand and reference each other. So it's not just one element of this structure or this puzzle alone that does the trick, I would say. We currently have 44 quality assurance agencies registered on AQUA from the bit more than 20 countries you see in dark blue on that map. And there are a lot of additional countries who are already involved in the governance of AQUA as governmental members, even though their own national quality assurance agency is not registered, is not recognized as working in compliance with the ESG yet in most cases. Poland has been governmental member since 2008, and the PKA, the agency, has been registered on AQUA since 2009. So it's in both ways. Poland was one of the countries involved quite from the start. Looking at the impact of registration, we actually surveyed both registered and non-registered agencies what they perceive as the main impact that they see or expect, depending on whether they are registered or not, from being registered on AQUA. And the first and foremost impact is clearly international reputation and the expectation to demonstrate their compliance with European standards at the international level, but sometimes also at national level to, in a way, fulfill the expectations of their own stakeholders. But it's also right afterwards comes the desire to improve the recognition of the qualifications of the universities that they have been accrediting or that they have been evaluating, especially internationally. And Tia mentioned that already as a purpose of the standards and guidelines as well. And the third important motivation for some quality assurance agencies is of course, the ability to work abroad, to carry out evaluations in other countries, and in turn, for higher education institutions to be able to seek evaluation or accreditation from an agency from a different European higher education area country and have that recognized as part of the national framework. So the main issue is really reputation. I think the recognition of degrees and qualifications is an issue that's also becoming much more important in light of the recent policy debates in the Bologna process towards automatic recognition of qualifications in the European higher education area. And we have some examples, such as the Flemish Community of Belgium that uses the ESG and AQUA registration as a proxy for automatic recognition, and that has a legal framework to automatically recognize qualifications and degrees that have been accredited by a registered agency. Also, the phenomenon of cross-border quality assurance is becoming more prevalent in Europe. There are a number of agencies that operate across outside of their own country. There are a lot of growing number of countries that allow their higher education institutions not only to be evaluated by a national agency, but also to turn to an agency from a different country for their evaluation or accreditation and have that become part of their own official framework for external quality assurance. At the moment, we're discussing and working on a possible Europe-wide database of quality assured higher education institutions and programs, to make the information which programs and institutions have been quality assured, evaluated, accredited by an AQUA registered agency available in one place. And of course, that will also be an impact of AQUA registration, whether an institution would be then show up there or not. So to conclude, I will leave you with a vision that I think we really have to aim for the different Bologna tools, the ESG, AQUA, the qualifications framework, to work hand in hand and to work together to really create a strong chain of trust, as I like to call it, in the Bologna process, that in the end of the day helps us to really translate and recognize qualifications easily and more smoothly than currently between different countries in the Bologna process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin, much. Okay, in the debate on the reform of higher education and science in Poland, we have a number of keywords, and the word excellence is definitely one of them. And while discussing the so-called excellence of academic education, we cannot escape from the question how to recognize and reward the excellent teaching. And the Teaching Excellence Framework is the initiative of the British government, which is definitely an innovative attempt of addressing this question. I would like to invite Ms. Sam Meakin from the UK Department for Education to present the concept of the Teaching Excellence Framework. Sami, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me here today and inviting me to come and speak about the Teaching Excellence Framework. So the Teaching Excellence Framework, or the TEF as it's known, is a new scheme that's been introduced by the UK government to recognise excellence in learning and teaching at higher education providers in the UK. The UK is one of the first countries to be implementing this kind of scheme around teaching excellence, and we believe it's really important to recognise teaching as part of being a world-class learning environment for students. For this reason, we feel that we're leading the way internationally to make sure that teaching excellence is rewarded and recognised in the sector. Participation in the Teaching Excellence Framework in the UK will be voluntary, and providers can choose to apply for the TEF in order to achieve one of 3 awards: a gold award, a silver award, or a bronze award. And this is open to all providers across the whole of the UK. So, what is the purpose of the Teaching Excellence Framework? So, this has been introduced to achieve 4 key aims. Firstly, it's to better inform students' choice about what and where they choose to study, giving students more information about where good teaching is on offer and the outcomes that teaching offers to students when they finish their degree. Secondly, it's to raise higher esteem for teaching and bringing it up on par with the traditional esteem that's given to research across the sector. Thirdly, we feel that it's important to recognise and reward the excellent teaching that does exist already across the UK sector. Finally, it's important that we better meet employment needs from business, industry and the professions, and by focusing on the student outcomes that are achieved in terms of employability. So, what does the framework look like? In terms of developing the framework, we looked at one of the key principles that we considered is in terms of how do we reflect on the diversity of the UK sector and enable innovation. Across the UK sector, there are lots of different types of providers and lots of different types of teaching excellence. The TEF has been developed to ensure that we fairly assess this diversity across the sector and continue to support innovation in our individual institutions and to allow for the institutional autonomy that's important in our sector. So these principles have been reflected in many different ways in the framework, but one of the key ways is in how we define teaching excellence. So not only do we look at the quality of the teaching itself in terms of how it's delivered, but we also look at the learning environment that the students experience and the outcomes and learning gain that students achieve. Before I move on, it's also important to note at this point that the framework is focused on undergraduate provision. So what does the assessment process look like? Providers that apply for the Teaching Excellence Framework are assessed by an independent panel, independent of government, and it's an expert panel of peers from the UK sector. This includes academics, student representatives, and employer representatives. And this panel will look at 2 key pieces of evidence. Firstly, they'll look at some metrics. So this is a standardised set of data about each of the providers that apply. This includes data about student feedback, about whether students continue their studies while they're at their degree, and also the employment outcomes and learning gain that's achieved by the students when they finish their degree. These metrics are benchmarked to consider contextual factors and the mix of students at each provider. In addition to these quantitative measures, we also look at the qualitative side and ask providers to write a submission to reflect on the additional context and evidence that's more specific to their provider and their experience. This is where the qualitative side comes in, as well as any other data that providers feel may be relevant. So taking all of this together, the panel will make an overall assessment about which of the 3 awards is most appropriate for that provider. So I thought it might be useful to talk about how this fits in with quality assurance that Tia and Colin have already spoken about. So all higher education providers are quality assured through established and robust systems that are implemented by our quality assurance agencies. These systems ensure that all providers do meet the high standards of academic quality across all aspects of their provision as required by the UK Government's Quality Code. The Teaching Excellence Framework, or the TEF, sits alongside those systems. The UK is committed to making sure that we continue to create a world-class learning environment, and we think that focusing on teaching is an important part of this. So the TEF has been introduced as an additional measure that sits alongside this to focus specifically on the teaching excellence at UK institutions. So one of the key links between quality assurance and the TEF is around the quality assurance is actually a precondition of providers applying. So in order to participate in the TEF, higher education providers must have already passed the high quality thresholds and standards that are set by our quality assurance system. In England specifically, there's a new regulatory framework being put into place that will be more risk-based in terms of the quality assurance, and hopefully that this will reduce the administrative burden on providers. The TEF fits within this framework as well, in that it encourages providers to focus their time on enhancing their teaching excellence. So in terms of implementation, the Teaching Excellence Framework is currently going through its first round of full assessments. We've asked our Higher Education Funding Council of England to implement this scheme, and they have appointed the panel, and those assessments are currently being undertaken by the panel now. We've had very strong participation across the sector, with almost 300 providers applying for a TEF award, and the first full awards will be announced in early June. Following this year's awards, we will be doing a full lessons learned exercise to make sure we continue to work with the sector and understand how this has worked to inform following year's assessments. Over time, we also plan to look at how this might work at a subject level. So the current framework looks at a provider's holistic teaching excellence, and over the next 2 years, we'll also, alongside the assessments, be running pilots to see how this might work at a subject level. So thank you very much. Hopefully that gives you a brief outline of the Teaching Excellence Framework, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Sam, very much. Also to all the speakers for keeping the time frame. It was quite challenging, taking into account how the topics were brought. Now we can start the round of more focused questions. And I would like to again start from Tia. And when it comes to Tia, I have quite complex question. It consists of 2 parts, which at first sight are a bit different from each other, but in fact they are much interconnected. So first part of the question would be how EUA perceives the term quality culture and how it can be embedded into external quality assessment. And the second part of the question concerns the term bureaucracy versus quality culture. In Poland, we talk a lot about the problem of bureaucratization of quality assurance procedures, both internal and external ones. And at the same time, we know that this is not just a problem which is typical for Poland, but it is an issue for universities across the whole continent. And what are, from your perspective, the possible ways which could be undertaken in quality assurance system in Europe in order to limit bureaucratic burden for institutions and staff?
Yes. Seems to be okay. It is working. Yes. Okay, we're starting with the very small questions and modest ones. But I do think that the 2 of them are to a certain extent linked. Let me first just comment that indeed the issue of quality assurance and accreditation being seen as bureaucratic, it's not a Polish phenomenon at all. This is something that comes up everywhere and no matter who we talk to. We are currently carrying out a project where we have separate meetings with representatives of the universities, the students, the academic staff, and so on. And I can assure you that in all these meetings, there is a point where we talk about the bureaucracy and the fact that how can we avoid that image. But here again, we don't really have a real recipe for it. But I do think that one of the recipes could be the focus on quality culture. So the way EUA has defined quality culture is that there are two aspects to quality culture. But before going to them, we have said that each university should aim at having its own quality culture, which aims to enhance the quality of our activities. And we need to consider two aspects. A, quality assurance processes. Those are the kind of processes that I referred to when I showed you the standards for quality assurance for universities. These are really, we do need to have the formal processes in place. We do need to be able to document and show what we are doing. But the other half of quality culture is the motivational part, the cultural part, the nurturing of commitment to maintaining high quality. And that's the challenging part, I think, for many universities. And it's not only me thinking, I think many of you know how to engage the academic staff or the administrative staff, or in some cases even how to engage the leadership into discussing the issues related to quality and quality assurance. And there we do need to go beyond the formal procedures. No one is going to be motivated by us going to them and saying that you need to fill in this and that documentation because the quality assurance agency wants that. That's not really motivational. We need to find our own motivations to do things and to really foster the commitment and have the informal communication. So this is what EUA thinks of quality culture. It has two aspects in it. And here I would go back to the ESG. I showed you the standards and I encouraged you to have a look at them. I did that because I think the fact that you are here means you do have some kind of responsibility on these matters. But I would not go to all teachers and all students in the universities and say to them the same thing. I don't think everyone needs to read the ESG, even if it is a wonderful document, because I have to say that because I've been working on it. But what they don't need to know all the technicalities of the ESG. They don't need to know all the technicalities of the quality assurance agency's requirements. But they do need to know how they assure quality and enhance quality in their own daily practice. So there needs to be a lot of translation. And this is also going back to the bureaucracy. I think sometimes we are missing that. We're not translating our quality assurance to the language that the academics speak. Or we are not asking the academics what they would want to see in quality assurance. It is often the externally defined how quality assurance is. Originally, I was trying to think of a good case study for you, a country or system where quality assurance would not be seen as accreditation wouldn't be seen as bureaucracy, but I couldn't come up with one because I think in all systems there is an aspect of bureaucracy. But I think there are efforts around the continent at the moment. Many agencies are thinking also about their own practices, and one thing I would say is that we need to, in order to reduce the image of this being a bureaucratic and burdensome activity, is A, we need to think about the language we use. As I said, we need to translate things. but also we need to think about what is really essential. Unfortunately, there is a human tendency of always adding new criteria to the accreditation or any other exercise we're doing. We come up with new things. It would be nice to know this, it would be nice to know that. But my suggestion would be to think about what is essential, what is really needed, what is the core business of quality assurance. And for instance, taking the example of the TEF exercise, in the UK, or England, in this case, TEF is doing one thing in the system, whereas the quality assurance, external quality assurance is doing another thing. And one needs to think that they should not be doing the same thing. One needs to clearly define that, okay, for instance, if we get the statistics from somewhere else, quality assurance shouldn't be asking us to collect the statistics again, but to use those statistics that already exist. So try to see synergies between the different mechanisms we have in our systems. Either it's at national level or even in the institutional level, because I know that it happens that the universities recreate bureaucracy for themselves. I've worked for a university, and I know that one of the things we kept saying all the time when I worked in the faculty level was that the rector's office was asking us the same thing all over again and creating more work for us. Then I moved to work for the rector's office, and I realized that I was doing it myself to the faculties. So a little bit of self-criticism is sometimes in place.
Thank you, Tyra, very much. I think that much of what you said actually corresponds clearly to the problem we are discussing when it comes to the quality assurance. Colin, the position of director of ECAR gives you a unique possibility of a good overview on the developments in the quality assurance system across the whole continent. And when it comes to the basic types of quality assessment, we can differentiate first of all the program and then institutional assessment. When it comes to institutional assessment, usually understood as an evaluation of whole institution. And from your perspective, what are the European trends in institutional evaluations or audits? Are there any good practices in mutual relations between program and institutional evaluations? What is the added value of institutional evaluations?
Well, I'm not sure if, fortunately or unfortunately, I think, first of all, there's not the one crystal clear trend that we can say, because the ESG leave quite a lot of room for countries to find their own, to design their own external quality assurance system and to find their own balance between program and institutional evaluation. At the same time, I think what we can clearly see is, if you look at some examples, that there have been systems in Europe that had let's say a combination of institutional evaluations or institutional accreditation and the full program evaluation and the full or full program accreditation. And I think in many cases that has been perceived as a very as a sort of bureaucratic approach, because institutions have complained that they have to demonstrate in a program accreditation the same thing that they have already demonstrated in an institutional evaluation, or the other way around. So I think you can see that there are a lot of countries, a lot of systems that have turned towards an approach of having an institutional evaluation, which has as a result, if you have, for instance, passed an institutional audit or have passed an institutional accreditation, that either your program accreditation disappears entirely, that it becomes more light, let's say you have only a light touch program check, or you have countries that have only initial accreditation of new study programs for those institutions that have already demonstrated in an institutional audit that they are very well capable of managing their own quality, and you don't have a periodic re-accreditation of existing programs anymore. So I think the trend is clear that if it's not just about adding institutional evaluation to program accreditation, but then at the same time removing duplication and in a way following the principle of the ESG, which is clearly saying that institutions have the main responsibility for quality and they also hint to the fact that if the institution is able to demonstrate that it adequately manages and controls its own quality of its own provision, that then the external quality assurance at program level can become lighter, or can possibly, and I think we see a lot of countries are going that way, can even disappear entirely. And that can be across all institutions. There are examples of countries that have well, sort of more dynamic or more static risk-based approaches, I would say. Some countries where different categories of institutions fall under different regimes. Or there are also countries there where every institution has the ability to choose whether it wants to go to an institutional accreditation and thus in a way benefit from a lighter program accreditation, or no program accreditation, external program accreditation at all, or whether the institution can also decide to leave it and still submit all their programs to accreditation. So there are a lot of different developments and trends, but I think one bottom line clearly is that it's not just about adding institutional evaluation or institutional accreditation to program accreditation, but it needs to lead to removing some duplication, and if the institution demonstrates the effectiveness of its own quality system through an institutional audit, it has to be in a way given more of its own responsibility.
Thank you, Colin, very much. And the last question is to Sam, of course. You presented the approach to quality assurance and recognition of teaching excellence, which is quite, I would say, unique in Europe. And I would like to ask you the follow-up question concerning the quantitative indicators you are trying to use in the TEF. The question about how to measure the quality of education is very important in our debate in Poland, and not only in the context of the quality assurance, but for instance in the context of funding the proper measure for the funding formula, for instance. And I have the question to you: why particular metrics have been chosen to measure teaching excellence, and what are the sources of data?
It's really loud. So one of the things that we've tried to do in introducing this framework is, like we've talked about bureaucracy, is to try to use already established metrics and quantitative data that's already well used in the UK sector. I mean, the other thing is that we've tried to choose metrics that align to the kind of three aspects of teaching excellence that I spoke about. So not only looking at teaching quality itself, but the learning environment and the student outcomes that students achieve. So in terms of the metrics that we use, there are kind of three types of metrics. And the first one is around student feedback. So we feel that it's important to listen to the students and the feedback that they give around the teaching environment and the learning that they receive. And the metrics that we've chosen come from a well-established national student survey that's been in place, and it's a consistent survey that's used by all institutions across the nation, and that's been in place for about 10 years in the UK. The second type of metric that we look at is around whether students continue their studies or whether they drop out. And again, this is existing in the sector. It's part of the UK's performance indicators that were first developed as sort of a consistent way to look at how institutions perform, and that's been in place since about 1999. And that's produced by the Higher Education Statistics Authority. The third type of metric we look at is student employment and further study outcomes. And again, this comes from a well-existing student survey called the DELI, which is the Destination of Leavers from Higher Education. And this is similar to the National Student Survey, a consistent survey that's sent out to all institutions to look at after when students finish their degree. Are they moving on to highly skilled employment? What kind of employment? Or are they continuing to do further study? And so by establishing and using and drawing on metrics that are already used in the sector, we are trying to make sure that we reduce the administrative burden and bureaucracy surrounding this so that both for implementation by government as well as for providers, they're not having to collect new data, and hopefully it sort of streamlines this process.
Thank you very much, Sam. Now we have a bit of time for the questions from the audience. So if there are any questions, I can see, yeah.
I have a question to Sam, I guess. I've read in the booklet that you are interested within the, with one specific problem within the whole area of the quality of higher education, namely with the problem of plagiarism. Okay, could you tell us a little bit more about methods that you use in the UK to prevent plagiarism, which is also a big problem in Poland right now?
So one of the key issues that our Minister is really keen to make sure that we're addressing is the proliferation of, specifically within plagiarism, the proliferation of online websites that get used to enable students to purchase essays and assignments online. And this is something that we've seen increase over time and that we're really keen to make sure that we start to address. So very recently, in the last month, the Minister has been working very closely with sector organisations to try and work on a coordinated approach that asks our universities' sector organisations to be writing new and updated guidance for universities. So it's up to individual institutions as autonomous institutions to put in place policies that prevent plagiarism, but we feel that there's definitely room for additional guidance to enable providers to create a consistent and robust approach to addressing this across the sector and making sure that there are tough penalties in place where this occurs. In addition to this, to support it, we're working with our National Union of Students to make sure that there's sufficient information to students out there to really make sure that they know that this practice is unacceptable and that they understand the help that they can receive if they are in a situation where they feel that they need to resort to this.
Łukasz Sułkowski, Polish Accreditation Committee. I have one comment and one question. Let's say about this quality culture. I think it's understood in the two different ways. Yeah, from one point, it's a let's say formal quality assurance mechanism, and sometimes people like us working in an accreditation agency has the tendency that university understand that in the same way, that this is just deeper and deeper processes of the let's say quality management, and at the part of the university is just the opposite understanding of the quality culture. It's just the academic traditional culture. Yeah, it's some kind of the, let's say, values and customs that are characteristic to the professorship and academic life. So it's a bit danger and the learning exercise for us when we are going to the university. How we can are pushed to find some way a common way of understanding, yeah? And about the question, in this moment, the ministry is working on the project of enhancing the internationalization of the universities by supporting international accreditation. So there are several professional accreditation that will get a university can get a grant for apply this international accreditation. And my question from your experience is what is your advice, how we could, what kind of the approach we should have to this accreditation? Because let's say, if we have the accreditation agency that is in Ecuador, this is a simple story. Yeah, we can just accept that because we are based on the same criteria of ESG 2015. Yeah, PKA fully applied these criteria, and then standards and guidelines are the same. But if it's out of this, what kind of the approach we should have? Mapping the process, making together the accreditation, because sometimes I think it will be bureaucratic just to expect that going by a professional accreditation once, then again by the national accreditation. So if you kindly can comment on that. Thank you.
I think that Colin is the right person to answer.
Probably. I think what's important what you said, the first thing should be to avoid any unnecessary duplication. So if and as you rightly say, so if the foreign agency is ACRA registered, it shouldn't be a problem. I think that should be able to be recognized as part of the system. If it's another agency, of course it gets more difficult, and I think it's a bit of a case-by-case solution that has to be found. I think there are some examples of agencies that do then review incorporation, so the national agency with a foreign agency that is not registered. It could also be that you do like an advanced validation or check of how that foreign agency works to make sure that at least in that case where maybe you are going to recognize their decision, they work clearly in line with the standards and guidelines and follow the ESG. And actually, so I think both approaches are valid and both approaches can be seen. What we actually also do with registered agencies that do that kind of arrangements, we also expect that they demonstrate if they at some point recognize decisions of other agencies that are not registered, that they really make sure themselves that those processes have been aligned properly to the ESG, either in a cooperation arrangement or by checking that in advance. And I think then, since that's probably always a very particular case, I imagine a university that maybe wants to have an accreditation by a very specialized agency from maybe another continent in a very specialized subject area. So I think it always probably needs to be an individual arrangement that needs to be found, where the agency, probably the national agency, either checks or does in a cooperation ensures the ESG alignment.
Would you like to address this question, Tia?
Yes, from the university perspective, working for an organization that represents universities, when we hear about different initiatives, new types of additional accreditation initiatives being introduced, we of course usually are skeptical. We start by saying, oh, more work for the universities. What is the added value? But so I think one needs to stay relatively critical in adding new procedures, looking into different parts of the university. But then when you speak sometimes with the individual universities, they are able to say why it makes sense. For instance, why, let's say in Germany, they've had a big national initiative where the National Rectors Conference and the DAAD, which is the mobility organization, they together carried out internationalization audits of the universities. It was a completely voluntary process for German universities. They could sign up, okay? They could sign up for that, and I guess I need to stop. And many of them signed up, basically all of them signed up. And the thing was, they, from their own strategic perspective, they saw the added value. They wanted to develop their international activities, so they saw the added value of this exercise in addition to the national regular accreditation. So what I would always say is, for universities is don't just do it because there is, for instance, money or a grant available, but really think how it fits into your own strategy. Does it help you? Do you think you can learn something to develop your own institution from it? Because fact remains, you typically do still have to do the regulatory quality assurance. So it's a question of trying to find the balance between different processes.
Okay. Thank you, Tia. I have an agreement with organizer that we will finish 20 past, so the bell ring was a bit too early. So we have still time for one intervention more, I think, and over there I can see one.
Thank you. Janusz Urias, Polish Accreditation Committee, Engineering Section. May I have a question to Sam? I understand that this excellency framework, it is a horizontal approach. So how do you take into account accreditation given by other bodies like Engineering Council of UK? Do you take that engineering accreditations into account in your excellency framework? Thank you.
So I think if I understand your question, you're asking about accreditation at more of a subject level?
I'm asking if why are you having this excellency framework, and when you're approaching to teaching process and evaluation of the teaching process, do you take into account accreditation given by other bodies?
So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we do is have the national quality assurance as a prerequisite for the Teaching Excellence Framework. In terms of accounting for other specific accreditations, they're not specifically included in the framework at this point. We are focused on some of the kind of specific provider-specific data that's there, and want to enable providers to sort of bring forward in their submission whatever's relevant. So we certainly encourage providers where they do have those kinds of accreditations or other relevant information that's more specific to their provider to bring that forward in their provider submission. But I suppose given that those other accreditations might be more specific to a provider, we haven't included that as something that's, I suppose, required as part of their excellence assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So I think after this panel we have a lot food for thought. I would like to thank our panelists, our speakers, for a very interesting presentation, or also for keeping the time frame. So we are finishing exactly on time. I think we learned a lot, especially when it comes to the European standards and guidelines, that this is a very important framework, and it can be important potentially also regards the recognition of degrees. But at the same time, it's not the rigid framework, so we have a lot of room for maneuver to make the system fit for its purpose in the Polish context. I think we also have quite interesting inspiration how to measure the quality, which could be used not necessarily in the discussion on the quality assurance in Poland, but in many other discussions. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for attention.